Hello, good evening, good night, good morning, good void. Hello to everyone, I am Vesper, Bat of Fortune. Hope everyone's having a good time today. For me, it's night, or well, pretty close to it. But hope everyone's having a good day. Stream might be a little short tonight. We might just be finishing up Carmilla and then moving on or reading someone else. But I hope everyone's having a good time. I'm okay-ish. Have been dealing with some friend stuff that has left me with no spoons. Sorry, I'm messing with the music. It's not working with me at the moment. But yes, haven't had the maximum amount of spoons, not the amount of spell slots I want for the day. But otherwise, I am good. I don't really want to talk about the stuff that's been happening with me, because it is private and I'm still figuring out my feelings. I apologize for, for Friday's stream not actually happening. But, other than that, there shouldn't be any more interruptions in the next week, I hope. Hopefully I will have things figured out by then, and I also hope I will have a Tomb Raider ready to go. Hopefully. But, yes, I will be reading the rest of Carmilla. We will be getting right into that. Let me just link everyone to, So, last time we left off, we were on chapter 12, in the middle of the General's recounting of the events that he has experienced. And presumably, his deductions upon the mystery of the sickness of the ladies in the local area, and how and why they've been dying. So, even though we already know, it has already been revealed that Carmilla is likely from the Karnstein family, as she looks exactly like Mikaela Karnstein. So, and we figured that out by an old portrait within the family line, and how she looks exactly like someone in the Karnstein family that is distantly related to Laura and her family. And so, we get to discover what exactly Carmilla is about to do now that she's probably all figured out. But let me just turn down the lo-fi and turn up the Victorian ambiance. We gotta get in the mood, chat. Not that I think I have a bad set mood. But tonight's stream may be short. We have a few people we can raid right after this. I think one of my friends is actually debuting in 30 minutes. So we may go jump over to their stream. So, let's see here. Where we left off was chapter 12. Let me just, there we go. But, for those of you watching right now, please sit back and enjoy. Just feel free to lurk. But, if you're watching the VOD, just go ahead and put this on and do what you need to do, you know. Hold on, I got messages. Okay, let's see here. Sorry, I was handling a thing. Oh, crud. There we go, okay. Okay, we're on a petition. Chapter 12. I do not remember the voice I gave this man. Sips. Then we are to lose, Madame la Comtesse, but I hope for only a few hours, I said with a low bow. It may be that only, or it may be a few weeks. It was unlucky his speaking to me just now as he did. Do you now know me? I assured her I did not. You shall know me, she said, but not at present. We are older and better friends than perhaps you suspect. I cannot yet declare myself. I shall in 3 weeks pass your beautiful schloss, about which I have been making inquiries. I shall then look upon you for an hour or two, and renew a friendship which I never think of without 1,000 pleasant recollections. This moment a piece of news has reached me like a thunderbolt. I must set out now and travel a devious route nearly 100 miles with all the dispatch I can possibly make. My perplexities multiply. I am only deterred by the compulsory reserve I practice as to my name, from making a very singular request of you. My poor child has not quite recovered her strength. Her horse fell on her at a hunt which she has ridden out to witness. Her nerves have yet not recovered. Her nerves have not yet recovered the shock, and now our physician says she must on no account exert herself for some time to come. We came here, in consequence, by very easy stages, hardly 6 leagues a day. I must now travel day and night on a mission of life and death, a mission the critical and momentous nature of which I shall be able to explain to you when we meet, as I hope we shall, in a few weeks, without the necessity of any concealment. She went on to make her partition, please. She went on to make her partition. Damn it. Beyonce, get out. Beyonce, get out. She went on to make her petition. It was in the tone of a person from whom such a request amounted to conferring rather than seeking a favor. This was only in manner, and as it seemed, quite unconsciously. Then the terms. Yes, Partition. To be fair, Partition is such a good song. Then, the terms in which it was expressed. Nothing could ever be more deprecatory. It was simply that I would consent to take charge of her daughter during her absence. This was, all things considered, a strange, not to say an audacious request. She in some sort disarmed me by stating and admitting that everything which could be urged against it by throwing herself entirely upon my chivalry. At the same moment, by a fatality that seemed to have returned all that happened, my poor child came to my side and in an undertone besought me to invite her new friend, Milaka, to pay us a visit. She had been sounding her and thought if her mama would allow her, she would like it extremely. At another time, I were told her to wait a little until at least we know who they were. But I had not a moment to think in. The two ladies assailed me together, and I must confess the fine and beautiful face of the young lady, about which there was something extremely engaging, as well as the elegance and fire of high birth determined me, and quite overpowered. I submitted and undertook too easily the care of the young lady, which her mother called Milaka. I'm assuming that's how you say it. Milaka. The Countess beckoned to her daughter, who listened with grave attention while she told her in general terms how suddenly and peremptorily she had been summoned, and also the arrangements she had made for her under my care, adding that I was one of her earliest and most valued friends. I made, of course, such speech, blah 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 blah. Let me turn this down just a little. A little too moody. I made, of course, such speeches as the case seemed to call for, and found myself, on reflection, in possession which I did not half like. The gentleman in black returned, very ceremoniously conducted the lady from the room. The demeanor of this gentleman was as to impress me with the conviction that the Countess was a lady of very much more importance than her modest title alone might have led me to assume. Her last charge to me was that no attempt was to be made to learn more about her than I had always guessed. Until her return, our distinguished host, whose guest she was, knew her reasons. But here, she said, neither I nor my daughter could safely remain for more than a day. I removed my mask imprudently for a moment, about an hour ago, and too late I fancied you saw me, so I resolved to seek an opportunity of talking a little to you. Had I found that you had seen me, I would have thrown myself on your high sense of honor to keep my secret some weeks. As it is, I am satisfied that you did not see me, but if you now suspect, or on reflection should suspect who I am, I commit myself in like manner entirely to your honor. My daughter will observe the same secrecy, and I well know that you will from time to time remind her, lest she thoughtlessly disclose it. She whispered a few words to her daughter, kissed her hurriedly twice, and went away, accompanied by the pale gentleman in black, and disappeared in the crowd. In the next room, said Milaka, there is a window that shall look upon the hall door. I should like to see that last of Mama, and kiss my hand to her. We assented, of course, and accompanied her to the window. We looked out and saw a handsome old-fashioned carriage with a troop of couriers and footmen. We saw the slim figure of the pale gentleman in black, and as he held a thick velvet coat and placed it about her shoulders, threw the hood over her head, she nodded to him and just touched his hand with hers. He bowed low repeatedly, and the door closed, and the carriage began to move. She is gone, said Milaka with a sigh. She is gone, I repeated to myself, for the first time, in the hurried moments that had elapsed since my consent, reflecting upon the folly of my act. She did not look up, said the young lady plaintively. The Countess has taken off her mask, perhaps, and did not care to show her face, I said. And she could not know that you were in the window. She sighed and looked in my face. She was so beautiful I relented. I was sorry that for a moment I had repented of my hospitality, determined to make her amends for the unavowed churlishness of my reception. The young lady, replacing her mask, joined my ward in persuading me to return to the grounds, where the concert was soon to be renewed. We did so, and walked up and down the terrace that lies under the castle windows. Millarca became very intimate with us, and amused us with lively descriptions and stories of most of the great people whom we saw upon the terrace. I liked her more and more every minute. Her gossip without being ill-natured was extremely diverting to me, who had been so long out of the great world. I thought what life she would give our sometimes lonely evenings at home. This ball was not over until morning sun had reached the horizon. It pleased the Grand Duke to dance till then, so loyal people cannot go away, or think of bed. We had just got through a crowded saloon, when my ward asked me what had become of Millarca. I thought she had been by her side, and she fancied she was by mine. The fact was, we lost her. All of my efforts to find her were in vain. I feared she had mistaken, in the confusion of a momentary separation from us, other people for her new friends, and had, possibly, pursued them in the extensive grounds which pursued and lost them in the extensive grounds which were thrown upon us. Now, in its full force, I recognized a new folly, having undertaken my charge of a young lady without so much as knowing her name, and fettered as I was by promises of reasons for imposing which I knew nothing. I cannot even point my inquiries by saying that the missing young lady was the daughter of the Countess who had taken her departure a few hours before. Morning broke. It was clear daylight before I gave up my search. It was not till near 2 o'clock the next day that we heard anything of my missing charge. And about that time, a servant knocked at my niece's door to say that he had been earnestly requested by a young lady, who appeared to be in great distress, to make out where she could find General Baron Spielsdorf, and the young lady, his daughter, whose charge she had been left by her mother. There could be no doubt, notwithstanding the slight inaccuracy, that our young Fred had turned up, and so she had. Would to heaven that we had lost her. She had told my poor child a story to account for having failed to recover us for so long. Very late, she said, she had got to the housekeeper's bedroom in despair of finding us, had fallen into a deep sleep which, as long as it was, hardly sufficed to recruit her strength after the fatigues of the ball. That day Millarca came home with us. I was only too happy, after all, to have secured so charming a companion for my dear girl. Okay. So, not much has happened besides the loss of Millarca, who has a tendency to get lost, as seen in previous chapters. And of course, her mother forcing her upon another person, which seems to be the way for her to get prey, I assume. So Millarca, also known as Carmilla, seems to be... Well, we don't know yet, do we? We don't really know about how or why Millarca is doing this, or why there's such a roundabout raid. Now, I guess going randomly into people's homes and being like, And just being like, hey, can I see your daughter, sir? Is not the most appropriate actions of anyone. Even back then, it was difficult for a stranger to be like, well, can I come in? I'm having issues. But, let's just continue on, shall we? Because we're moving quite along. There soon, however, appeared to be some drawbacks in the first place. Millarca complained of extreme languor, the weakness that remained after her late illness, and she never emerged from her room till the afternoon was pretty far advanced. In the next place, it was accidentally discovered, although she always locked her door on the inside, and never disturbed the key from its place till she admitted the maid, to assist her at the toilet, that she was undoubtedly sometimes absent from her room in the very early morning, and at various times later in the day before she wished it understood that she was stirring. She had been repeatedly seen from the windows of the Schloss, in the first faint grey of the morning, walking through the trees in an easterly direction, and looking like a person in a trance. This convinced me that she walked in her sleep, but this hypothesis did not solve the puzzle. How did she pass out from her room, leaving the door locked on the inside? How did she escape from the house without unbarring the door or window? In the midst of my perplexities, an anxiety of far more urgent kind presented itself. My dear child began to lose her looks and health, and that in a manner so mysterious, even horrible, that I became thoroughly frightened. She was at first visited by appalling dreams, then, as she fancied, a spectre, sometimes resembling Millarca, sometimes in the shape of a beast, indistinctly seen, walking around the foot of her bed from side to side. So this is interesting because, like, if I remember correctly, it is thought that werewolves were originally from vampires. I don't remember correctly, but I think, like, in some stories, werewolves are just vampires who, with a specific subset of powers, but vampires have always been associated with transformation. But let's continue on. I just wanted to point that out, that vampires have always been associated with transformation for some reason. Taking a sip. Lastly came sensations. One, not unpleasant, but very peculiar. She said resembled the flow of an icy stream against her breast. At a later time, she felt something like a pair of large needles pierce her, a little below the throat, with a very sharp pain. A few nights after, followed by a gradual and convulsive sense of strangulation. Then came unconsciousness. Some people are into that. I could hear distinctly every word the kind old general was we're getting out of the flashback. I could hear distinctly every word the kind old general was saying, because by this time we were driving upon the short grass that spreads on either side of the road as you approach the roofless village, which had not shown the smoke of a chimney for more than half a century. You may guess how strangely I felt as I heard my own symptoms so exactly described, those which had been experienced by the poor girl. But for the catastrophe which followed, would have been that moment a visitor upon my but for the catastrophe which followed, would have been, at that moment, a visitor at my father's chateau. You may suppose how I felt as I heard him detail habits and mysterious peculiarities, which were, in fact, those of our beautiful guest, Carmilla. A vista opened in the forest. We were on a sudden under the chimney and gable. Ew. A vista opened in the forest. We were on a sudden under the chimneys and gables of the ruined village, and the towers and battlements of the dismantled castle, round which gigantic trees that grouped overhung us from a slight eminence. In a frightened dream, I got down from the carriage, and in silence, for we had each abundant matter for thinking, we soon mounted the ascent, and were among the spacious chambers, winding stairs, and dark corridors of the castle. And this was once the palatial residence of the Karnsteins, said the old general at length, as from a great window he looked out across the village. He saw a wide, undulating expanse of forest. It was a bad family, and here its blood-stained annals were written. He continued, "It is hard that they should, after death, continue to plague the human race with their atrocious lusts. That is the chapel of the Karnsteins down there." He pointed down to the grey walls of the Gothic building, partly visible through the foliage, and a little down the steep. "And I hear the axe of a woodman," he added, "busy among the trees that surround it. He possibly may give us information of which I am in search. Point out the grave of Makala, Countess of Karnstein. These rustics preserve the local traditions of great families, whose stories die out among the rich and titled so soon as the families themselves become extinct. We have a portrait at home of Makala, the Countess Karnstein. Would you like to see it?" asked my father. "Time enough, dear friend," replied the general. I believe that I've seen the original, and one motive which has led me to you earlier than I first intended was to explore the chapel which we are now approaching." "What? See the Countess Makala?" exclaimed my father. "Why, she has been dead more than a century." "Not so dead as you fancy, I am told," answered the general. "I confess, General, you puzzle me utterly," replied my father, looking at him. I fancied for a moment, with a return of suspicion that I detected before. But although there was anger and detestation at times in the old general's manner, there was nothing flighty. "There remains to me," he said under the heavy arch of the Gothic church, for its dimensions would have justified its being so styled, "but one object which can interest me during the few years I remain to me on earth." Hold on, let me repeat that. "But one object which can interest me during the few years that remain to me on earth, and that is to wreak upon her the vengeance which, I thank God, may still be accomplished by a mortal arm." "What vengeance do you mean?" asked my father in increasing amazement. "I mean to decapitate the monster," he answered with a fierce flush, and a stamp that echoed mournfully through the hollow ruin. His clenched hand was at the same moment raised, as if it grasped the handle of an axe, and he shook it ferociously in the air. "What?" exclaimed my father, ever more bewildered. "To strike her head off. To strike her head off. Cut her head off? Aye, with a hatchet, with a spade, or with anything that can cleave through her murderous throat. "You shall hear," he answered, trembling with rage, and hurrying forward, he said, "That being will answer for a seat. Your dear child is fatigued. Let her be seated, and I will, in a few sentences, close my dreadful story." The squared block of wood which lay upon the grass-grown pavement of the chapel formed a bench on which I was very glad to seat myself, and in the meantime the general called to the woodmen, who had been removing some boughs which leaned upon the old walls, and, axe in hand, the hardy old fellow stood before us. He could not tell us anything of these monuments, but there was an old man, he said, a ranger of the forest, at present sojourning in the house of the priest, about 2 miles away, who could point out every monument of the old Karnstein family, and for a trifle he undertook to bring back with him, if we would lend him one of our horses, in little more than half an hour. "Have you long been employed of this forest?" asked my father of the old man. "I have been a woodman here," he answered in his patois, "under the forester all my days. So has my father before me, and so on, as many generations as I can count up. I could show you the very house in the village here in which my ancestors lived." "How came the village to be deserted?" asked the general. "It was troubled by revenants, sir." I don't know what this accent is, I'm just going with it. "Several were tracked to their graves, and they were detected by the usual tests, extinguished in the usual way, by decapitation, by the stake, and by burning. But not many of the villagers were killed. But not until many of the villagers were killed. But after all these proceedings, according to law," he continued, "so many graves open, and so many vampires deprived of the horrible animations." Oh, they dropped the V word. They actually dropped vampires. "The village was not relieved, but it may be that this not to insert myself too much, but it may have been that this translation? Because I'm pretty sure this is translated. This translation may have added in vampires. They may have used something else, because I would consider revenants and vampires to be different creatures, but similar. So, I'm not sure if vampires was an accurate translation or something they decided to use in more modern tongue. "So many graves open and so many vampires deprived of the horrible animation. The village was not relieved, but a Moravian nobleman, who happened to be traveling this way, heard how matters were, and being skilled as so many are in his country in such affairs, he offered to deliver the village from its tormentor. He did so thus. There being a bright moon that night, he ascended, shortly after sunset, to the towers of the chapel here, from which he could distinctly see the churchyard beneath him. You can see it from that window. From this point he watched until he saw the vampire come out of his grave, and place near it linen clothes which had been folded, and then glide away towards the village to plague its inhabitants. The stranger, having seen all this, came down from the steeple, took the linen wrappings of the vampire, and carried them up to the top of the tower, which he again mounted. When the vampire returned from his prowlings and missed his clothes, he cried furiously to the Moravian, whom he saw at the summit of the tower, and who, in reply, beckoned him to ascend to take them. Whereupon the vampire, accepting the invitation, began to climb the steeple, and so soon he reached the battlements, the Moravian, with a stroke of his sword, clove his skull in twain, hurling him down to the churchyard, whither, descending by winding stairs, the stranger followed and cut his head off. The next day, delivered and the body to the villagers, who duly impaled and burnt them. This Moravian nobility had authority then from the head of the family to remove the tomb of Mircalla, Countess Karnstein, which he did effectually, so that in little while its site was quite forgotten. "Can you point out where it stood?" asked the general eagerly. The forester shook his head and smiled. "Not a living soul could tell you that now. Besides, they say her body was removed, but no one is sure of that either." Having thus spoken, as time pressed, he dropped his axe and departed, leaving us to hear the remainder of the general's strange story. Ooh, these accents are getting out of hand with me. Can I put a filter on this? Let me just, do a thing, chat. Okay. Okay, I think I got myself a noise filter, so hopefully that helps me out a little. But, so we have learned that it is likely that, well, we know that there's history of vampires in the area, and that Mircalla was so hidden or so well forgotten that no one can tell you where the tomb is. So it was likely that she, as a vampire, was likely never going to be found, and that worked for her advantage. But let's keep going on, because we only have... Okay, we're on chapter 14 out of 16. Oh, this is gonna be a short stream. Which I'm okay with. Like, I don't want to start up another book quite yet. Like, I don't want to, like, I want to keep the streams very to one thing most of the time. So, I'm okay if we end it early. But this is good. This is good. We can probably talk about Carmilla a little bit after the story, after the last chapter, but I think we'll talk about everything that's happened at the end. But chapter 14, the meeting. "My beloved child," he resumed, "was now growing rapidly worse. The physician who attended her had failed to produce the slightest impression on her disease, for then I supposed it to be. He saw my alarm and suggested a consultation. I called in an abler physician from Graz. Several days elapsed before he arrived. He was good and pious, as well as a learned man. Having seen my poor ward together, they withdrew to my library to confer and discuss. I, from the adjoining room, where I had awaited their summons, heard these two gentlemen's voices raised in something sharper than a strictly philosophical discussion. Philosophical discussion. I knocked at the door and entered. I found the old physician from Grants maintaining his theory. His rival was combating it with undisguised ridicule, accompanied with bursts of laughter. This unseemly manifestation subsided and the altercation ended on my entrance. "Sir," said the first physician, my learned brother seems to think that you want a conjurer and not a doctor." "Pardon me," said the old physician from Gratz, looking displeased. "I shall state my own view of the case in my own way another time. I agree, Monsieur le General, that by my skill in science I can be of no use. Before I go, I shall do myself the honor to suggest something to you." He seemed thoughtful and sat down at a table and began to write. Profoundly disappointed, I made my bow, and as I turned to go, the other doctor pointed over his shoulder to his companion, who was writing, and then with a shrug significantly touched his forehead. This consultation, then, left me precisely where I was. I walked onto the grounds, all but distracted. The doctor from Gratz, in 10 or 15 minutes, overtook me. He apologized for having followed me, but said that he cannot conscientiously take his leave without a few words more. He told me that he cannot be mistaken. No natural disease exhibited the same symptoms, and that death was already very near. There remained, however, a day, or possibly 2, of life. If the fatal seizure were at once arrested, with great care and skill, her strength might possibly return. But all hung now on the confines of the irrevocable. One more assault might extinguish the last spark of vitality which is, every moment, ready to die. "And what is the nature of the seizure you speak of?" I entreated. I have stated all fully in this note, which I place in your hands upon the distinct condition that you send for the nearest clergyman, and open my letter in his presence, and on no account read it till he is with you. You will despise it else, and it is a matter of life and death. Should the priest fail you, then, indeed, you may read it. He asked me, before taking his leave finally, whether I would wish to see a man curiously leaned upon the very subject which, after I had read his letter, would probably interest me above all others, and he urged me to earnestly invite him to visit him. there, and so took his leave. The ecclesiastic was absent. I read the letter by myself. At another time, or in another case, it might have excited my ridicule. But into what crackeries will not people rush for a last chance, where all accustomed means have failed, and the life upon which a beloved object is at stake? Nothing, you will say, could be more absurd than the learned man's letter. It is monstrous enough to have him consigned to a madhouse. He said that the patient was suffering from the visits of a vampire, the punctures which he described having occurred near the throat, where he insisted the insertion of 2 long, thin, sharp teeth, which, it is well known, are peculiar to vampires. And there could be no doubt, he added, to the well-defined presence of the small livid mark which concurred in describing as that induced by the demon's lips. And every symptom described by the sufferer was in the exact conformity with with those recorded in every case of a similar visitation. Hold on, I'm stretching chat. I'm stretching, I'm sipping, I'm serving. Being myself wholly skeptical as to the existence of any such portent as the vampire, the supernatural theory of the good doctor furnished, in my opinion, but another instance of learning and intelligence which oddly associated with some one hallucination. I was so miserable, however, that rather than try nothing, I acted upon the instructions of the letter. I concealed myself in the dark dressing room that opened upon the poor patient's room, in which a candle was burning, and watched there till she was fast asleep. I stood at the door, peeping through the small crevice, my sword laid on the table beside me, as my directions prescribed, until, a little after 1, I saw a large black object, very ill-defined, crawl, as it seemed to me, over the foot of the bed, and spread itself up to the poor girl's throat, where it swelled in a moment into a great palpitating mass. For a few moments I had stood petrified. Now I sprang forward with my sword in hand. The black creature suddenly contracted towards the foot of the bed, glided over it, and standing on the floor about a yard below the foot of the bed, with a glare of skulking ferocity and horror fixed on me, I saw Millarca. Speculating I know now not what, I struck at her instantly with my sword. But I saw her standing at the door, unscathed. Horrified, I pursued and struck again. She was gone, and my sword flew to shivers against the door. I can't describe to you all that passed on that horrible night. The whole house was up and stirring. The spectre Millarca was gone, but her victim was sinking fast, and before the morning dawned, she died. The old general was agitated. We did not speak to him. My father walked to some distance and began reading the inscriptions on the tombstones, and thus occupied he strolled into the door of a side chapel to prosecute his researches. The general leaned against the wall, dried his eyes, and sighed heavily. I was relieved on hearing the voices of Carmilla and Madame, who were at that moment approaching. The voices died away. In this solitude, having just listened to so strange a story, connected as it was with the great entitled dead, whose monuments were mouldering among the dust and ivy around us, every incident which bore so awfully upon my own mysterious case, in this haunted spot, darkened by the towering foliage that rose on every side, dense and high above its noiseless walls, a horror began to steal over me, and my heart sank as I thought that my friends were, after all, not about to enter and disturb this trist and ominous scene. The old general's eyes were fixed on the ground as he leaned his hand upon the basement of a shattered monument. Oh wow, I think I'm hitting the mic, sorry. Under a narrow arched doorway surmounted by one of those demoniacal grotesques in which the cynical and ghastly fancy of old Gothic carving delights, I saw gladly the beautiful face and figure of Carmilla enter the shadowy chapel. I was about to rise and speak, and nodded smiling in answer to a peculiarly engaging smile, when with a cry, the old man by my side caught up the woodsman's hatchet and started forward. On seeing him, a brutalized change come over her features. It was an instantaneous and horrible transformation, as she made a crouching step backwards. Before I could utter a scream, he struck at her with all his force, but she dived under his blow and unscathed caught him in her tiny grasp by the wrist. He struggled for a moment to release his arm, but his hand opened, the axe fell to the ground, and the girl was gone. He staggered against the wall. His gray hair stood upon his head, and a moisture shone on his face as if he were at the point of death. The frightful scene had passed in a moment. The first thing I recollect after is Madame standing before me, impatiently repeating again and again the question, "Where is Mademoiselle Carmilla?" I answered at length, "I don't know, I can't tell, she went there," and pointed to the door through which Madame had just entered, only a minute or two since. But I have been standing there in the passage ever since Mademoiselle Carmilla entered. She did not return. She then began to call Carmilla through every door and passage from the windows, but no answer came. "She called herself Carmilla?" asked the general, agitated. "Carmilla? Yes," I answered. "Aye," he said, "that is Millarca. That is the same person who long ago was called Makala. Countess Karnstein, depart from this accursed ground, my poor child, as quickly as you can. Drive to the clergyman's house, and stay there till we come. Be gone. May you never behold Carmilla more. She will not find her here. You will not find her here." So everything has come full circle, 4 circles. Full circle. Carmilla is Macarla, and Carmilla is also Macarla and Millarca. So the true identity's been revealed, though it wasn't like it was being hidden. But wow, we're on to chapter 15 of 16 already. But let's continue. Ordeal and execution. As he spoke, one of the strangest looking men I ever beheld entered the chapel at the door through which Carmilla had made her entrance and her exit. Sorry. He was tall, narrow-chested, stooping with high shoulders, and dressed in black. Oh no. I think this is the guy who is her guardian. His face was brown and dried in deep furrows. He wore an oddly shaped hat with a broad leaf. His hair, long and grizzled, hung on his shoulders. He wore a pair of gold spectacles, and walked slowly with an odd shambling gait, with his face sometimes turned up to the sky, and sometimes he bowed down towards the ground, seemed to wear a perpetual smile. His long, thin arms were swinging, his lank hands, in old black gloves, ever so much too wide for them, raving and gesticulating in utter abstraction. "The very man!" exclaimed the general, advancing with manifest delight. "My dear Baron, how happy I am to see you. I had hoped of meeting you so soon." He signed to my father, who had by this time returned, and leading the fantastic old gentleman, whom he called the Baron, to meet him. He introduced him formally, and they at once entered into earnest conversation. The stranger took a roll of paper from his pocket and spread it on the worn surface of a tomb that stood by. He had a pencil case in his fingers, which he traced the imaginary lines from point to point on paper. The stranger took a roll of paper from his pocket and spread it on the worn surface of the tomb that stood by. He had a pencil case in his fingers, which he had traced imaginary lines from point to point on paper, which from their glancing from it together, at certain points of the building, I concluded to be a plan of the chapel. He accompanied what I may term his lecture with occasional readings from a dirty little book, whose yellow leaves were closely written over. Dirty little book, dirty little book. I'm sorry. They sauntered together down the side aisle, opposite to the spot where I was standing, conversing as they went. Then they began measuring distances by paces. Finally, they all stood together, facing a piece of the side wall, which they began to examine with great minuteness, pulling off the ivy that clung over it, and rapping the plaster with ends of their sticks, scraping here and knocking there. At length they ascertained the existence of a broad marble tablet, with letters carved in relief upon it. With the assistance of the woodman, who soon returned, a monumental inscription and carved escutcheon were disclosed. They proved to be those of the long-lost monument of Marcella, Countess Karnstein. The old general, though not, I fear, given to the praying mood, raised his hands and eyes to heaven in mute thanksgiving for some moments. "Tomorrow," I heard him say, "the commissioner will be here, and the Inquisition will be held according to the law." Then, turning to the old man with the gold spectacles whom I have described, he shook him warmly by both hands and said, "Baron, how can I thank you? How can we all thank you? You will have delivered this region from a plague that has scourged its inhabitants for more than a century. This horrible enemy, thank God, is at last tracked." My father led the stranger aside, and the general followed. I know that he led them out of the hearing. He might relate my case, and I saw them glance often quickly at me as the discussion proceeded. My father came to me, kissed me again and again, leaning from the chapel, said, "It is time to return, but before we home we must add to our party the good priest, who lives but a little way from this, and persuade him to accompany us to the Schloss." Sipping. In this quest we were successful, and I was glad, being unspeakably fatigued when we reached home. My satisfaction was changed to dismay upon discovering there were no tidings of Carmilla. Of the scene that had occurred in the ruined chapel, no explanation was offered to me, and it was clear that it was a secret which my father for the present determined to keep from me. And her own father told her that they were roommates. They were roommates. Or in this case, mates. The sinister absence of Carmilla made the remembrance of the scene more horrible to me. The arrangements for the night were singular. 2 servants and Madame were to sit up in my room that night. The ecclesiastic with my father kept watch in the adjoining dressing room. Adjoining dressing room, my bad. The priest had offered certain solemn rites that night, the purport of which I did not understand any more than I comprehended the reason of this extraordinary precaution taken for my safety during sleep. I saw all clearly a few days later. The disappearance of Carmilla was followed by the discontinuance of my nightly sufferings. You have heard, no doubt, of the appalling superstition that prevails in Upper and Lower Styria, in Moravia, Cilicia, in Turkish Serbia, in Poland, and even in Russia. The superstition, so we must call it, of the vampire. If human testimony, taken with every care and solemnity, judicially, before commissions innumerable, each consisting of many members, all chosen for integrity and intelligence, and constituting reports more voluminous, perhaps, than exist upon any one of other class of cases, is worth anything. It is difficult to deny or even doubt the existence of such a phenomenon as the vampire. For my part, I have heard no theory by which to explain what myself have witnessed and experienced, other than that supplied by the ancient and well-attested belief of the country. The next day, the formal proceedings took place in the chapel of Karnstein. The grave of the Countess Mircalla was opened. The general and my father recognized such his perfidious and beautiful guest in the face now disclosed to view. The features, though 150 years had passed since her funeral, were tinted with the warmth of life. Her eyes were open. No cadaverous smell exhaled from the coffin. Two medical men, one officially present, the other on part of the promoter of the inquiry, attested that the marvelous fact there was a faint but appreciable respiration, and the corresponding action of the heart. The limbs were perfectly flexible, the flesh elastic, and the leaden coffin floated with blood, in which to a depth of 7 inches the body laid immersed. Here then were all the admitted signs and proofs of vampirism. The body, therefore, in accordance with the ancient practice, was raised, and a sharp stake driven through the heart of the vampire, who uttered a piercing shriek at the moment, in all respects such as might escape from a living person in the last agony. Then the head was struck off, and a torrent of blood flowed from the severed neck. The body and head was next placed to a pile of wood and reduced to ashes, which were thrown upon the river and borne away, and that territory has never been plagued by the visits of a vampire. My father has a copy of the report of the Imperial Commission, with the signature of all who were present at these proceedings, attached in verification of the statement. It is from this official paper that I have summarized my account of this last shocking scene. I would stop and say something, but we're at the conclusion now, so. So we're just gonna continue on. I write all this, you suppose, with composure. Oh man, I hit the mic again, oh my god. I write all this, you suppose, with composure, but far from it. I cannot think of it without agitation. Nothing but your earnest desire, so repeatedly expressed, could have reduced me to sit down to a task which has unstrung my nerves for months to come, and reinduced a shadow of the unspeakable horror which years after my deliverance continued to make my days and nights dreadful, and solitude insupportably terrific. Let me add a word or two about the quaint Baron Vordenburg, whose curious lore we were indebted for the discovery of the Countess Mircalla's grave. He had taken up his abode in Graz, where, living upon a mere pittance, which was all that remained to him of the once princely estates of the family in Upper Styria, he devoted himself to the minute and laborious investigation of the marvelously authenticated tradition of vampirism. He had at his fingers' ends all great and little works upon the subject. Magia Posthuma, Phlegon de Mirabilis Spes, Augustinus de Cura Pro Mortuis, Philosophicae et Christianae Cogitations de Vampiris, by John Christopher Herrenberg, and 1,000 others, among which I remember only a few of those which he had lent to my father. He had a voluminous digest of all judicial cases, from which he had extracted a system of principles that appear to govern, some always and some occasionally, only the condition of the vampire. I may mention in passing that the deadly pallor attributed that sort of revenants is a mere melodramatic fiction. They present in the grave, and when they show themselves in human society, the appearance of a healthy life. When disclosed to light in the coffin, they exhibit all symptoms that are enumerated as those which proved of the vampire life of the long-dead Countess Karnstein. How they escape from the graves and return to them for certain hours every day without displacing the clay, or leaving trace disturbance of the state of the coffin or its cerements, has always been admitted to be utterly inexplicable. The amphibious existence of the vampire is sustained by the daily renewed slumber in the grave. Its horrible lust for living blood supplies the vigor of its waking existence. The vampire is prone to be fascinated with an engrossing vehemence, resembling the passion of love by particular persons. In pursuit of these, it will exercise inexhaustible patience and stratagem, for access to a particular object may be obstructed in 100 ways. It will never desist until it has satiated its passion and drained the very life of its coveted victim, but it will, in these cases, husband and protract its murderous enjoyment with the refinement of an epicure, and heighten it by gradual approaches of an artful courtship. In these cases, it seems to yearn for something like sympathy and consent. In ordinary ones, it goes direct to its object, overpowers with violence, and strangles and exhausts often at a single feast. The vampire is, apparently, subject, in certain situations, to special conditions. In the particular instance of which I have given you a relation, Makala seemed to be limited to a name which, if not her real one, should at least reproduce, without the omission or addition of a single letter, those which as we say anagrammatically, which compose it. Carmilla did this, so did Millarca. My father related to the Baron of Vordenburg, who remained with us for 2 or 3 weeks after the expulsion of Carmilla, the story of the Moravian nobleman, and the vampire at Karnstein churchyard. And then he asked the Baron how he discovered the exact position of the long-concealed tomb of the Countess Makala. The Baron's grotesque features puckered up into a mysterious smile. He looked down, still smiling, on his worn spectacle case and fumbled with it. Then looking up, he said, "Sips," he said, "Sips. I have many journals and other papers written by that remarkable man. The most curious among them is one treating of the visit of which you speak to Karnstein. The tradition, of course, discolors and distorts a little. He might have been termed a Moravian nobleman, for he had changed his abode to that territory, and was, beside, a noble, but who was in truth a native of Upper Styria. It is enough to say that in very early youth he had been a passionate and favored lover of the beautiful Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. Her early death plunged him in inconsolable grief. It is the nature of vampires to increase and multiply, but according to an ascertained and ghostly law, assume starting a territory perfectly free from that pest. How does it begin? How does it multiply itself? I will tell you. A person more or less wicked puts an end to himself. A suicide under certain circumstances will become a vampire. That spectre visits living people in their slumbers. They die, and almost invariably in the grave develop into vampires. This happened in the case of the beautiful Mircalla, who was haunted by one of those demons. My ancestor Vordenberg, whose title I still bear, soon discovered this, and in the course of studies to which he devoted himself, learned a great deal more. Among other things, he concluded that suspicion of vampirism would probably fall sooner or later upon the dead countess, who in life had been his idol. He conceived a horror, be she what she might, of her remains being profaned by the outrage of posthumous execution. He left a curious paper to prove that the vampire, on its expulsion from its amphibious existence, is projected into a far more horrible life. He was resolved to save his once beloved Mircalla from this. He adopted the stratagem of his journey here, a pretended removal of her remains, and a real obliteration of her monument. When age had stolen upon him, and from the veil of years, he looked back upon the scenes he was leaving. He considered, in a different spirit, what he had done, and a horror took possession of him. He made the tracings and notes which guided me to the very spot, and drew a confession of the deception he had practiced. If he had intended any further action in this matter, death prevented him, and the hand of a remote descendant has, too late for many, directed the pursuit of the lair of the beast. We talked a little more, and among other things, he said this. One sign of the vampire is the power of the land. The slender hand of Mircalla closed like a vice of steel on the general's wrist when he raised the hatchet to strike. But its power is not confined to its grasp. It leaves a numbness in the limb it seizes, which is slowly, if ever, recovered from. The following spring, my father took me a tour through Italy. We remained away for more than a year. It was long before the terror of recent events subsided, and to this hour, the image of Carmilla returns to memory with ambiguous alternations. Sometimes the playful, languid, beautiful girl, sometimes the writhing fiend I saw in the ruined church. And often from reverie I have started, fancying I heard the light step of Carmilla at the drawing-room door. And that's the end. I'll keep the music up for ambience. But, wow. That was Carmilla. I'll be real, that was kind of anticlimactic of an ending. It felt very anticlimactic. There was, like, no, declarations of love. There was no, stopping by Laura to stop the killing of Carmilla. I would have written that differently, honestly, but that's just me. Now I kind of want to write a vampire book. Yeah, it was yeah, it was apostolatory, so like it is reflective. But I feel like the ending does not match the rest of the book. But that's just me. I would really like more of the like Laura trying to fight for Carmilla. But this didn't end as bad as I thought it would. I thought it could have ended with like very anti-lesbian. No, it's just anti-suicide and like like very don't disgrace the dead sort of thing. As I always say, horror is usually reflective of the time it's written in, and like whatever is going on in the world at the time will reflect in the story. I'm not sure about vampire myth at that time, so I can't be like, oh, it's totally like anti-suicide, cryptids. don't do, don't, don't off yourselves, kids, or you'll turn into a vampire, which, which may not work today. Not sure if it worked back then either. Not for people who were probably into that sort of stuff. It's like, do you want to be a vampire, kids? But, it definitely felt like that was very based on, being very, anti-sickness, very anti-death, very don't mess with the dead body kind of stuff. And I'm glad you're here or whatever. I hope you got to listen to at least some of that. But I like that it definitely, even if Carmilla was just gaslighting Laura, it definitely seemed like Laura never had like she never turned down the feelings, you know? She reciprocated. So, and like I said, we never had anything that says like Laura is heterosexual. It's definitely like, I think she reciprocates the feelings to Carmilla. It's just that Carmilla is a being looking for blood in a very manipulative, gaslighty way. Very I'm going to seduce you for my own needs and not yours. I do like it's more that they do mention that there is other ways vampires feed. It's just that Carmilla is stuck with a more slower process. I feel like there's some questions left unanswered, like who is Carmilla's mother, but it could entirely be that Carmilla is able to split herself into two, or that her mother is not really her mother, just whoever the oldest victim she has at the moment is. Because, like, they definitely said it's Carmilla is Millarca and Carmilla is Makala. And that Carmilla is a teenager. They described her as having the looks of a teenager. So, like, yeah, that's kind of a bit of an open end to me. But it's not that problematic, as it's like, it's an open thing, but it's not like dreadfully needs closing. it's like it leaves enough room for for deduction and finding your own ideas in it, but you don't have to. But it's not like 100% important to the plot to know who that woman was. You just know that she was a part of Carmilla's plots and her needs. You know, or that she might have been Carmilla herself in another form. Because we do know that they can transform because they are vampires. And like, I like how like this story is like both. It goes over a lot of vampire classic tropes, but it also makes a lot of stuff its own. I guess that's because this is like one of the OG books. But yeah, that was like a really good read. That was like a really good book. I really love gothic books for their descriptions. Like this one is like very vivid, and like the way they described the last few scenes really felt oppressive. Like, you know, stuff was about to go down because we were in a very oppressive scene, and that's how it was like portrayed. Your scenery should be its own like character and should add its own personality to the scene. So like that's good writing. Like they were setting up with the description of the scene, of the location. But yeah, that was a pretty good book. And I can't wait for next Sunday. I'm not sure what we're gonna do next Sunday. We may start another book, or we may do more coffee talk. I think we may do more coffee talk, because I need to finish that for you guys. And also, yes, I do need to read Dracula. I do. But, I may read something else, something not Dracula, because I think, Maris, my art brother, never finished his Dracula reading before he decided to rebrand. So I don't want to, like, be, like, reading Dracula while he's reading Dracula. So I'm gonna hold off on Dracula. I might read something else by Bram Stoker. He has a lot of stuff to read. So what I'm thinking, I kind of want to read an Agatha Christie thing because I'm really in a mood. So it's probably gonna be Agatha Christie or Dracula next Sunday if we don't do coffee talk. Because like I don't need to jump into a book right after Carmilla necessarily. But I had a good time. I hate that the stream is so short, but I'm a little bit low energy, and I did only want to read Carmilla. I'm sad that it was so short. That was like really good. Like I said, I really would have written in a different ending. Honestly, I probably would have written it to where Laura would have died. I would have her die. But then the beginning wouldn't have made sense. So yeah, I would have written it to where Laura probably died at the end. Because like she had like one final tryst with Carmilla or something happened. I would have had it like Carmilla getting staked and then decapitated is already pretty dramatic, but like I wanted something more fulfilling than what happened. but that's just me. I still think it was pretty good. It's a good ending can elevate a bad book, and a bad ending can weigh it down a good book. But this ending is pretty good. Kind of meh, but it's not like so horribly meh it weighs down all of Carmilla. It's still pretty good. Like, everything's tied up. I I kind of don't want to think about it too much, because now that I'm thinking about it, I'm just like, oh, they added like a lot at the end. Like, there was a lot of stuff that was only explained at the end. But it was a different time. Reading standards, writing standards were different. This, like I said, this would probably be written differently if it was now. Especially if I was writing it. But I'm glad that we all finished Carmilla together. Of course, I will be getting out these VODs as soon as I can on my YouTube so that others can watch it and read and listen along. But I think I'm going to end here because I have ice cream waiting for me in the fridge. And like I said, I just wanted to finish Carmilla, and I would feel weird if we started something else. So, like, I will learn how to space out my reading streams from now on. But, yes, this bat has ice cream in the fridge. It's Godiva. And while I could save it, I'm also like, it's mine. It's only mine. It was bought from me. But, yeah, I think this is a nice place to end stream. It's an hour and 30 minutes. It was just a reading stream. Very nice and comfy. And like, yeah, like, I will learn how to, like, stretch out my reading streams and how, like, to properly do them from now on. I just think I think it was mostly just, how I did it on Sunday before last, my debut weekend. I think that was probably, like, where we kind of screwed up because I did something else. Next weekend we will probably be doing Coffee Talk, or starting an Agatha Christie book or Bram Stoker book, so I'll be excited for that. I already have my schedule up on Twitter. We are playing Tomb Raider on Thursday if I can get the controller to work, and we are hopefully finishing the Coma recut on Friday. And Saturday I'm still doing static. I may be able to. It depends on the new tier, and if my static leader plans on doing anything with the schedule, if I can start streaming on Saturday or not. If not, I will start streaming sometime else during the week as well. Likely Tuesday, because Monday is the day I do my writing prompts and watch Critical Role and stuff with Brobat. And I'm thinking about starting a writer's workshop on the first Monday of every month, because that's the only day they're not showing Critical Role on Mondays. But we'll see. I'm glad that you all were here with me. Also, one of my friends is having a debut, I think, so that's another reason I wanted to send you all to them. So let me find them. And let me just, because I think I'm watching them. I think. Oh no, I don't think I am. Okay, let's see. So, I'm gonna send y'all over. Okay. I'm gonna send you all over to a Nana. The cutest, like, creature ever. Let me do a thing. But thank y'all for being here with me. And, I hope everyone has a good night. And I will see you all on Thursday, or if you're watching the VOD, I'll see you when I see you. And I hope you enjoyed your time here. Good night, and may fortune be with you. We will be raiding Nananuki Bog, and I will see you all later. Good night.